48-hour art check, round 75. Think about that, even though we just talked about it.
Platinum Jubilee?
Something like that.
48-hour art check!
Okay.
Platinum Jubilee. All right.
There are 3 of us, and that is
I know
why...
it's to represent, each of us represents the quarter. So if you multiply us, we are episode 75.
Oh man, our powers combined. If you guys could see the nest of wires that I had to do to try to make this work, this is the most Mickey Mouse rigged situation I've ever been at, which is great. Steven needs to take a selfie of it.
It doesn't really capture the true.
No, it doesn't. So yeah, we are back with Stephen Henderson, and if you guys remember an early episode, the first episode of the podcast, or what was that, like a month ago, Josh?
Yeah, I think about a month, maybe a month and a half ago. Yeah.
We had Stephen on, and he's going to be involved in our art check this time, and we're going to check up on his progress since we talked. So if you want to go back and look at kind of the initial episode, it's called "Why Are You Not Writing?"
It's so harsh. That's so true.
So, and if nothing goes well tonight, I'm actually just really excited that the 3 of us can hear each other, which is way more complicated than I thought it would be, and we're all on the screen at the same time. So yeah, technical wonders never cease. But yeah, so I think we're going to start with the art check, and we'll keep everything to 30 seconds. So Stephen, you didn't do this with us before, but we'll have a timer on the screen, 30 seconds. We'll talk about what we've done in the last 48 hours, what we're planning on doing, or what was difficult about that, and what we're planning on doing in the next 48 hours. But then we'll kind of dive more into kind of like part 2 of our conversation.
Cool.
Now that some time has passed. So, and Josh, I did not load up your image.
Totally.
So let me... Is that it there?
Yeah, that's it.
Yes, it is. Okay. Yes, sir.
All right, cool. Okay, now your image is loaded. I don't have an image.
All right.
What I'd like to try is doing the podcast intro now to see if I can save myself time. So those of you that are watching this live, you're about to see me mess this up. So, welcome to the 48-hour art check best of podcast. In this episode, Josh and I reconnect with Stephen to follow up with his progress based on the conversation that we had in the first episode of this podcast, which was "Why Are You Not Writing?" So, welcome back, Stephen.
Hey, thanks.
All right.
Good to be here.
Okay, so Josh, you want to start on this?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay,
so all right, so progress, I guess, is that what we're jumping into?
Yeah.
So I have actually exceeded a little bit, and I think I was estimating like 2 rough pencils, and I got 3 panels roughed. Once again, pretty simple panels, but I'm feeling good about getting a little further. So I've been having a pretty strong few art checks. I feel like I'm kind of getting ahead of where I estimated, which is where I'd like to be. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great, and those are looking really good.
Thank you.
As far as me, I don't have anything visual to show, but what I have is I've spent the weekend, I have ripped the audio from every Illo Talk episode that I've done. So I have like several hundred MP3 files.
Wow.
And then I also have been kind of figuring out a number of kind of audio podcast things as well as some of that stuff. So it's been a lot of technical things, but I feel really good about the progress that I have. So I'm actually really close to pulling the trigger on a number of things. So it was kind of just a boring technical weekend. So
Nice.
Stephen, what have you done?
Technical progress is still progress.
It is. It's just not as fun. So, what have you done in the last 48 hours?
48 hours. Weirdly, took a pause from this novel I started and just kind of stepped back and took a stab at like where the thing is going.
Okay.
You know, yeah, sketching out some major plot points and how I'm gonna kind of intersperse themes, and so yeah, this weekend was for me to like stop and just kind of reevaluate. Yeah.
Great. That's awesome. How about challenges, Josh?
All right. The main challenge I've experienced is just kind of the typical one of just the kid, the like, lots of plans and family stuff over the weekend. So just kind of trying to squeeze in that time that like in order to make progress on this book that will not write itself. So yeah, that's the biggest challenge. But I feel like I overcame it. So yeah.
Good. Yeah, as far as me, I had both kids this weekend for most of the weekend, and so it was just a lot of dad time, which was fun, but also just I can't really do anything while that's happening, so it was just 10 to 12 hours of kid time a
Pure
day.
bliss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bliss is sure.
Yeah. Interspersed.
Scarlett's getting into trying to mix her own slime.
Good. That's a logical next step.
Right. So, how about you? What are some of your challenges?
Yeah, traveling with the family and a funeral. Just kind of a lot this weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably the least productive weekend.
Yeah, funerals can be hard.
Yeah, but onward.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Josh, what are your plans for the next 48 hours?
All right. I am hoping to. Let's see how far I am. I'm hoping to get 2 panels penciled, but with the way this week has been going, maybe I'll finish the rough pencils.
Cool. Yeah.
We'll see. So, yeah.
That'd be great. I'll take the rest of your 13 seconds.
Take
and just
it.
say, I have worked out all of the kinks, I think, on my online store. So if you go to corykerr.com/store, you'll see the most recent thing that I finished. And my plan is to kind of test that with a few people and make sure everything works and that orders go through and things like that. And then continue kind of my progress on the podcast side of things as well.
Nice.
Yeah. So, Stephen, what are your plans for the next 48 hours?
Words on the page, baby. Word count.
Okay.
Yeah, that.
Do you track a number of words or an amount of time? Or?
It's still evolving.
Okay.
That's a good question, but yeah, I try to hit a good couple hundred good words. I'm trying to do that almost every day. But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just I need some volume to work with and to start shaping things. Because until I have it on the page, then it's kind of, la la land.
Yeah.
Fake.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm curious, and I think everybody else is curious. This has been one of our more popular episodes, is having you on the first time. I got a lot of people talking about it afterwards. I think not because of the spectacle of you being put on display, but because I think we all can relate to kind of the experience of wanting to produce something and being on the edge of pulling the trigger on it, but feeling that resistance. So what's happened since we've met on your projects? You had started, I think, a number of first chapters, never really hit chapter 2.
Right.
So where are you now?
Yeah. Thank you, Justin Bieber. Where are you now?
Is that a Justin Bieber song?
Justin Bieber song.
That's embarrassing that you know that.
I know. I have an impeccable taste. So, wow, a lot has happened, and I feel like it's all been, just a bunch of different moments that have kind of led to me realizing again and again, like, that was a good conversation a month or however long ago it was. I had a conversation with a close friend who is kind of at a funny crossroads in life and wants to, for lack of a better word, kind of reset and just kind of like start fresh, young 20-year-old, just kind of like, yeah, just realizing they want like a fresh start. And one of the things he said to me was that he wants to start playing piano again. And like, for whatever reason, just kind of going through life, working, but not creating at all, anything at all. And he said, I want to start writing music. I want to start getting back into piano like I played when I was, 10. And it was a really, really good conversation. I actually bought him a copy of War of Art, so hopefully he appreciates that. But yeah, like conversations like that, and then just me, being bold and honest enough with myself to just sit down and start. I guess something that really gave me a good kick in the pants was the fact that it's now National Novel Writing Month.
Right.
And so people are really getting, excited about that. And it's definitely something that helped me. I'm not one who's ever really participated in one of those like month-long challenges or anything, but I think for the first time this has been really helpful.
So are you following that challenge, or are you just encouraged by lots of people writing near you?
Encouraged, number one, but now following, not as well as I should, but like definitely better than I ever before. Mm-hmm. If I had been more thoughtful about it at the beginning of the month, I would have said, okay, I'm gonna hit 1,000 words a day or whatever it was, right, and then stick to it. But
so when we talked to you last, there were several things, because one of the things that I thought that was really good that Josh brought up was that you can't just say, well, I'm going to do this now, and then snap your fingers and start doing it. You've got to kind of like, put a plan together and carve out some time and carve out some space and talk to loved ones around you that are kind of in your house. And so make plans. So what have you done to get to the point where would you say that you're now consistently writing every day, with the exception of maybe a funeral here or there or something?
Yeah.
So what have you done to get to that point from randomly kind of like waiting for the muse to strike and you occasionally spit out a first chapter to consistent production in your writing? What's changed, and how do you get to this point?
Yeah.
I hate to point this out. There's a low battery notice.
Shoot.
As a heads up.
Okay, thanks. Sorry.
10%. The clock is ticking.
Okay, carry on.
So yeah.
I don't know what specifically. So I'm trying to reframe the question for myself. Just a series of conversations, like with my wife and with myself, and realizing, I have random chunks of time where I can, get work done.
So part of it was just recognizing that it's possible.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, recognizing like the options out there and realizing that I'm not as stuck as I maybe thought I was. Sorry, we'll fix that camera situation.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right. So you actually pursued that. You actually had that conversation, kind of looked at your time and have found like a little chunk that you can carve out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like evening time, after the kids go down, I can kind of like sit and gather thoughts and jump into it. And otherwise, if I know that it's going to be kind of a crazy night, then I'll try to carve it out sometime like midday, lunchtime, that sort of thing.
It's a good call. So it's has that been difficult to kind of like get in the zone when you're like, you're like putting kids to sleep 1 minute and then you're sitting down and trying to get in the game?
And you guys both are more practiced in this than I am, but I think it's like in the back of my mind, I'm looking forward to it, so it's okay. It's like the little reward, Now I just need to stop eating dessert every night.
How are those related?
Because it's like everybody is like, get the kids down, sit down, have a half gallon of ice cream. It's like that's usually my life. So if I can avoid that.
Okay. So,
you know what I mean.
So with that, have you found that there's any practices or anything that you've implemented as far as kind of switching from work person to dad person, husband person to writer person? Like, is there a way that you're able to kind of like a habit that you've built? Because for me, it's like, I sit down in a specific chair in a specific place, and I put my headphones on and I turn an audiobook on, and then I know that it's time to go.
Yeah.
Have you found that there's kind of a series of kind of or a ritual or something?
Oh yeah.
So what is that for you?
Yeah, funny enough, my wife makes fun of it. Makes fun of me because almost every night, I make my creation, which is a random recipe I made up one night a while back, which is like bananas, oats, chocolate chips, nuts, peanut butter, and I just like mix it in this bowl, and then I sit down and I will eat it. After, so put the kids down, take a shower, make this weird creation concoction thing, sit down, pull open the laptop on the blue and white striped couch, put in the headphones, turn on some tunes, and start typing. So
cool.
Yeah,
nice.
Getting in the zone.
Yeah, and I definitely would think it would be a different workflow than if you're like doing art, because like whenever I'm writing, it's like I can't listen to like a book while I'm writing.
Funny. Yeah.
Which can be really irritating.
Yeah.
Because I'll be like really into an audiobook and they'll be like, I gotta put this on pause because the words start conflicting. But music's a little different. So like, do you do soundtracks that kind of relate to like the type of thing you're writing?
I've done that before, and I haven't spent enough time trying to like trigger some sort of feelings or words thereby. Mostly just stuff that can just be nice background that I'm not thinking about, that I've heard 1,000 times but that I like. Get that earworm thing where it's a song you could listen to for an hour and never realize that it's the same song.
Yeah,
that
sounds good.
Yeah.
Josh, I'm curious, do you have kind of any rituals that kind of help you transition modality from like daily grind into comic book time?
I mean, like one thing I've done that helps me weirdly enough is I literally wear like a shirt and tie to work.
Right.
So when I get home from work, it's like there's a ritual there, and it's partially as like a bit of a middle finger to like the kind of corporate types at my work, because they're all corporate casual.
Because each night you light your tie on fire. Sacrifice it. Sorry.
And I'm just like, hey, you know what? Like, I'm not gonna go corporate casual because I'm not cool like corporate guy. I'm an artist, so I'm gonna go full out corporate if I'm gonna do it. So anyhow, it's a weird thing, but it also psychologically like gears me for getting home from work. Yeah. And then I have like really organized chaos. So my art table is like chaotic, and it looks like a complete like an atom bomb just exploded on my table. But if something's moved, it like throws me for a loop. So I have like complete like organized chaos. It's funny too. Like if I ever did it like a tutorial on like Photoshop, it would be the same way. My dock is like just organized chaos, and I'm still having to kind of reset it up from the CC upgrade, because now it's like all organized and like everything's hidden, and I'm like, no, I don't want it hidden. I want it like laid out all over the place where I have to like move it. And, so that, I think if there's any rituals, like that would be a huge one. But I think I needed more ritual when I was first getting into it. Like it was really, it's a hard transition for me to kind of get in a workflow. And it's kind of cool that you like, to me, one of the most exciting things that you said was that it like the idea of like kind of desiring it, like it's almost like this really like the reward for the end of the day kind of thing. And that to me means you've probably been at it for a couple weeks at least. And so that's really exciting, because those first few weeks are, I think, the hardest. When it's not necessarily something you're desiring to do, and then you're trying to kind of figure out that ritual. Like that's really, I think, hard. What about you, Cory? Do you have like a weird ritual before you get to working?
I'm the worst at this. I need to get better at it, but I mean I literally, it will take me forever to like make it down the stairs, because there's just so many distractions along the way. So I'll usually try to be really present. I've been focusing on, because I get so excited about some of the things that I'm working on, especially like right now where it's something that isn't like automatic. It's not something where I've like grooved those pathways into my brain and I can just sit down and ink. It's like problem solving right now. I'm trying to figure out like, I love and hate this, but I try to figure out like the most optimized way to do something. And so until I optimize a process that I'm going to do often, it takes up like 80% of my waking thoughts. Like I'll just be in meetings and I'll just think, oh, if I plugged this into this, or if I moved this step of the process in front of this other one, maybe that would go faster, or I could eliminate it if I did it this way. And so I've been really distracted the past 3 or 4 days because that's what I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out the quickest way to be able to produce both a podcast and a live video series without having it cut too much more into the time, because it is really time consuming. I mean, I sat down 45 minutes before we went live just to set up 3 people being on camera at the same time, and that's 45 minutes I could have been doing something. So a lot of it is I usually focus on like when I'm with my family, being with my family, which is actually, and this sounds bad, it's not normally like this, but I have to like decide to be present and decide like, wait, no, this is not optimization time. This is hangout time. And so,
that's good though.
So anyway, so I do that. And then once the routine with my daughter is solid, because she was super colicky as a kid, and with everything that was going on with her and my wife and I, like I live and die by her bedtime routine being precisely at 7:30. And so at 7:30 she goes down, or she starts her thing at 7:40. At 7:40 she's done. I read to her for a little while. By 8 I'm hanging out with my wife. I usually hang out for 30 to 45 minutes, and we do whatever. And then either she comes downstairs with me and we turn something on while I work, or we're sick of each other and I go downstairs without her or whatever. But eventually I come downstairs, and when I come downstairs, it's a different world.
Subterranean. Yeah,
and it literally is for me like passing a threshold. Just like going to the office is, and so I have like a dedicated space. And so I think for me, like being in this space is, my brain knows like, oh, now it's art time. And so that's kind of my ritual is a lot of like, attempting to not ignore the human beings that I love, and then eventually like crossing that threshold and kind of like letting the dam burst and getting into it down here.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating juggle too, because like when you're first trying to get into, at least for me, when I was first trying to get into like doing a personal project, that was the stuff that like I really sincerely like didn't want to sacrifice, and it was really hard to kind of make that time.
Right.
And then there was this weird point, and so to me that didn't sound bad, because there is this weird point where you do have to like consciously, it kind of reverts the other way, where you have to consciously be like, okay, brain, stop like wanting to do art right now.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, because if I look back like to like 2 years from now, I'm not looking at like my social media posts about art, I'm looking at like pictures of my kid,
Right.
Yes.
So it's like, but I definitely get that. Like there's this desire that like is, kind of like what was being described.
For me, it ebbs and flows, because I think 2 weeks ago, I was the opposite, where I had to really convince myself to get up off the couch. We were watching some stupid TV show that I don't care about, but I was just enjoying just sharing space and time with my wife and just being together. But doing that for 2 hours, I'm like, okay, I'm now like cutting into the time that I should have been sleeping. And so I have to like kind of fight it the other way. And so I'm really irregular. Even though I've been doing this now consistently since 2012, I still don't feel like the battle is over. I feel like the battle continues to rage, between productivity and resistance and the balance of life. I don't think you ever get to the point where it's like, now you're totally in balance. It's like, oh, okay, I'm tilting a bit this way, got to make an adjustment. Now I'm tilting a bit this way, I've got to make an adjustment. oh, everything fell off, so I've got to rebuild it and then, balance it again. And so, I think I was just describing my current state, because literally last week it was totally different. It was the opposite of that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think like that kind of thing is why like before, like, especially if you're in like a relationship or whatever, I know you guys have probably already done this, but for anybody who's like watching, who's like wanting to get into a personal project, it's good to make like a list of hierarchy for your life. I would recommend this even if you're not working on like a personal project, but like a hierarchy of like who takes like the highest, kind of percentage of priority in your life.
Yeah.
And so like once you've kind of set those priorities, it's really easy to kind of see where art kind of falls in that list. And usually, that's going to fall under family.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like that kind of becomes a nice little check against myself if I ever have moments where I'm like putting it above, because it's like I have to kind of move it back down. But if it goes way below other priorities like, entertainment or something, which for me is like way lower on the list. Yeah. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm putting like entertainment like above art. Like that's ridiculous, because that is the ultimate entertainment, is like making stuff. So,
True.
But anyhow, anyhow, Stephen, I want to know more. Like, I want to know more about like what your project is.
Yeah, that was a big question.
Not like specifics, but because I don't want you to blow. Tell us how it ends. Yeah. And
there's a twist. We'd like to know the twist. No, here's what I want to know, because this is what I'm super curious about. You had some number, more than one, of story ideas, quite a few. How did you settle on the one that you were going to do? Because a form of resistance is kind of like juggling a billion ideas all at the same time and never actually moving the needle on one particular one. So what was your process like, and how did you choose that, and what is it like now?
Literally the process was just, I'm just going to choose this. That's
but
about it.
Was it instinct? Was it you flipped through your book, or
instinctual?
There's one that just felt right.
And luckily, like we talked about, a month or so ago, I've had so many things like on 12 different back burners just slowly simmering, and they're all still there. Like that's the beauty of just saving your work and just keeping it for a future day. Mm-hmm. And so all those ideas are still there, baked into whatever I've begun. So I kind of just said to myself, well, this is a cool challenge that I want to take on, and just said, this is what I'll focus on. And then I don't think it was like any big decision or like a something I really thought about too much. It was just let's do it.
And any regrets? I mean, are any of the other stories, do they feel like they're calling out and trying to take your attention? Or
no, not right now. And that's now I need to find this quote. You guys need to vamp while I find this quote.
Okay.
It is the sweetest quote, actually.
Josh and I will vamp. I'm not familiar with that term.
Vamping is like musical theater, so like, the orchestra has played like that song, and like so-and-so is supposed to come out on the stage, but they don't.
They miss it.
So they just keep playing those same chords over and over until they run on stage, and like
I just want to point out one of the differences between Stephen and I is that you thought that I was going to understand a industry term in musical theater just now.
It's the best. It's the best.
So
there's that. Hey, but you're married to a thespian. So.
She's a singer that acts because it allows her to sing, but she's not an actress.
It's not true.
No, I mean she acts, but she herself does not claim to be an actress. She claims to be a singer who enjoys performing, and so she has to learn lines and do them as well.
Yeah, that's
true. I was actually, Josh, I'm curious on your thoughts on this. Since we're talking about storytelling and writing and things, I made a Shakespeare joke today in class. And
this is good vamping, by the way.
And there were 20 people that looked at me as if I had a third arm growing out of my head, and I was like, have you guys never read or watched Hamlet, and they were like,
Oh.
I've heard of Hamlet, and I'm like, what is happening right now that you guys don't get a fairly obvious Shakespeare joke?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm curious, am I like just a literary weirdo, or like
No, I would
don't
think that
most people
that
know
tends to be, like,
Shakespeare?
that should be like a general ed, like high school level knowledge, but I don't know. I mean, I have met a lot of people who didn't get Shakespeare quotes, you know? It's weird. You'd like do like a little bit of the Tomorrow soliloquy or whatever, and
Yeah.
like people would just look at me like, what's that nonsense?
Why did you start rhyming and rhythming all of a
But
sudden?
then I kind of wonder, you know, am I just the moron who's like, you don't know the bard? How dare you, sir? You know.
Well, because I grew up. All four of my grandparents and my parents are all teachers, and most of my extended family is very, very into like kind of old literature, and so I mean, to me, we would like get together as a family, and we're like, hey, let's watch Much Ado About Nothing, you know, and we also watch like, you know, stupid stuff like Fletch and stuff like that, but like. On par with Fletch was also Mel Gibson's Hamlet, and you know, Branagh's Much Ado About Nothing, and you know, and all these other, and so like when I was like, you know, it's kind of like Hamlet's Mousetrap, and everybody was like, huh? I was like, you know, the plays the thing to catch the conscience of the king. They're like, what? And I'm like, no, this is not a generational thing. This is just you guys being uninformed. I'm sorry. This is. As an educator, I can feel okay about you guys not knowing this and me being upset about that. That's fine.
What you should do the next class is do a class within your class to trap and teach your class
I like this.
about how they should read Shakespeare.
Yes, I will have a traveling troupe reenact them not understanding a joke about something that they should understand and watch their reaction to see if they get it.
Exactly. I think that would be be brilliant.
How's that for vamping?
That was pretty good.
That is funny. Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead, Josh.
No, I want to hear the quote.
No, this is not the quote, but Google's not helping much. But
this is great radio.
It's referring me to a Paulo Coelho quote, the guy who wrote The Alchemist, and a bunch of other stuff. Anyway, this is a similar quote, but he said, "When you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it." There's another quote that's even better. That's like this expanded version of the quote, but it basically says like, as soon as you begin a creative act, as soon as you actually set forth on a path, then all manner of elements, you know, conspire to help you, and things you hadn't considered before pop up, and you know, insights and help comes along as you like start. And so I think for me, like in the process of just choosing something to work on helped so many other things come out of the woodwork and help. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Anyway, that was a long-winded way of saying.
So you're basically saying you're like Frodo, and you've set out on your journey, and then you're discovering that Samwise is there, and
and
there are
Voldemort's in there too, you know.
And strange... my axe. No, but there's a part of there's a part of War of Art where Stephen Pressfield talks about this, because most of what people focus on in the War of Art is they focus on the resistance, right? But the thing that I find super interesting is when he says, I'm a religious person, so I'm about to talk about angels, but if you feel uncomfortable with the idea of angels, then think about, you know, beings outside of time, or, you know, the universe or God or whatever force you want. But ancient history and most cultures have this concept of the muses or the genius, or the idea that you are possessed with some sort of inspiration that Christians might call the Holy Ghost, you know, that Buddhists might call, you know, tapping into kind of the collective ancestry, you know, or whatever it is. There's this idea that there are ideas outside of mortality that are trying to get into mortality because existing in time is how an idea is realized. And he gives the example of, and I can't remember if it was Mozart or whoever, but he was saying Mozart might not have been the first one to hear that symphony in his head, but he was the first one to pay attention and suffer and do the work to bring it into time. And it's kind of an interesting thing because initially you have the resistance, the stuff that is trying to stop you from working. It'll distract you. It'll rage against you. It'll affect all the people around you to try to conspire against you to stop it. Right. But immediately upon beating that, you're rewarded by the genius, the muse, the ideas outside of time. And there seems to be this kind of like runner's high, second wind situation with creativity that once you push past initial resistance, kind of pure inspiration begins to flow. And it's still a battle, but it's interesting that you've described that because I've found that as well, to have things kind of crop up around me that begin to kind of bolster me up, and ideas start coming from places that I didn't even think about, and making connections and whatnot, because once resistance is beaten in that day, you start to get that kind of reward with it.
Yeah, and what's interesting about the kind of like idea of like the angel, or like I guess like the Socratic third eye kind of idea of the, like there's theorems and mathematicians aren't inventing them, they're discovering them. They're kind of floating around in this realm of truth and beauty, and you're able to kind of touch it a little bit and grab whatever it is and put it on paper. I totally believe in that. I think most people participating in the creative act like know there's some weird thing. I think it also explains why, so many people like, who aren't creative, see an ad for a movie and they're like, that was my movie. Like, that was my idea,
Right.
And in reality, it probably was.
Yeah.
I mean, it probably was an idea they had, and an idea like 5 other people had, and a screenwriter beat them to it.
Yeah.
Or the screenwriter was more active in selling it,
Yeah.
So
the screenwriter was the one who was willing to make the sacrifices to bring it into existence.
Yeah. So it's an interesting concept, but it's definitely kind of true. You will see a lot of help, but I think the interesting analogy to a war is you're gaining ground constantly every time you fight resistance. Every time you give in to resistance, you're kind of losing ground. And so it's akin to gaining ground in a battle, where it's like if you gain, a strong area to fight from, you have a little bit more relaxation after the fact, because you're in a stronger position. But if you go into like a really highly contested area and you fight pretty hard, you might be fighting hard for a while. And some of the best and I mean, some of the best battles might take a really long time. And I would actually kind of think that generally, I would think if you're experiencing a lot of resistance, that might be a good sign that you're onto something good. It could also be really valid resistance. Like, it could be like, dude, you're literally, making this terrible movie and it's The Room or something. But then again, if you made The Room, like, I think that movie's done fairly well, weirdly enough, in the interim. So maybe that was the right call to kind of make that wonderfully terrible movie.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, I remember reading, there's one of my professors in my master's was one of the artists that drew the Clone Wars saga, or the Clone Saga during the really what is universally recognized as a terrible time for Spider-Man and the storytelling. Like, it became really convoluted, and like you had all these clones running around and nobody knew who was who, and it was really whatever. There was this kid who was dying of cancer, and literally the thing that kept him alive was consuming as much of this really confusing, convoluted, what most people think is a poorly told story as he possibly could. And it was his mom saying that, looking back, she really thinks that this story like saved his life, because he was like, I've got to fight this, or I'm not going to know what's going to happen, next week. And now he's fine, and he beat it, and the cancer's in remission, and he's an adult with a family and stuff. And so there's also that idea that even stories that people think are not critically acclaimed, or that most people hate, or that are universally villainized, even those type of things can still reach somebody and make a significant impact. And so it's kind of like one of those things where the crowd's not rarely right, and it's the individual that kind of matters more.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah.
So that was a conversation killer. Sorry.
No. Actually, so I've gotten 2 messages throughout the years that I've been kind of working on this comic, and it doesn't have a broad readership at this point, and I'm not quite expecting it to till I'm finished. But I've gotten 2 messages from people who literally were suicidal and didn't do it because of the comic.
Yeah.
Wow.
And which is weird because my comic's not all call the suicide hotline number or anything. It's more just explaining what that's like to be in that state. And yet I've had 2 people tell me it got them through. And that's really weird. And it's been just random. And usually that is those times where I feel really down about what I'm doing. I'm nobody's reading this. Nobody gives a crap. I have, I've been putting it up and I have only so many subscribers or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And a lot of that negative self-talk, which I think most writers and artists experience. And it's usually in the depth of that where somebody will reach out and say something like that just was well, that's crazy. That's a crazy, awesome sign that I'm on to something,
Yeah.
So I mean, to me, I definitely think there's some truth to it because let's say I put this thing out, it doesn't do anything. It's already done something, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's been really weird. I've never really experienced that from writing something. So that's been really weird.
So yeah, that's really cool. I like that concept. I'm curious, Stephen, and I'm sure Josh has some questions too. Based on your career trajectory and your experience thus far, I'm assuming you've mainly written quite a few very short things, right? Mm-hmm. As a journalist, you're writing things for magazines, for websites, and for papers. How has this been different to write something that's more long form? Has it been harder? Has it been easier? Do you take it at a different tack?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that can seem scary to people, but every large work is made up of smaller pieces, and that's the way I view it. There's a reporter and an author I really like, David K. Johnston, and he's written a bunch of awesome histories and biographical type stuff, but he says you don't write a book, you build a book. And I think so many projects are like that. You don't just sit down and vomit out 100,000 words, but you take it in little chunks. Some people I've been reading about, and I do this occasionally too, will just skip ahead to an important thing and draw that, so to speak, or write it, and then come back and fill in the other details as it kind of builds the story. Mm-hmm. And I actually feel like I'm at a point in this book where I want to do that, just so that I have a goal for where I'm going to end up, and kind of fill it in from there.
Yeah.
But
so that was going to be my next story, or my next question was, I'm curious on this transition from occasionally writing to writing consistently. Did you just start on chapter 2? Did you just start where you left off? Did you revisit what you've already written? Did you take a few days and kind of map the story out?
I started with chapter 1, page 1, paragraph 1. And because I've had this idea rolling around and I needed to just start, and now that it's there, I'm realizing all the things that I need to change. And even I'm into whatever chapter 3, 4, something, and which kind of caused me the other night to realize, like, okay, I need to actually sketch out where this is going. But yeah, I'm before we started tonight, Cory and I were talking about another author who is really famous, but in both of our views takes too long to kind of like jump in and get started in a story.
So we're talking about Brandon Sanderson, Josh.
And my brother-in-law had recommended him the other night, and I pulled up a preview online and started just reading the first couple of paragraphs, and like it didn't do anything for me. Just I have to be hooked from the first line, or else I won't. I
really want to convince you to just muscle through the first 50 pages of one of his books.
So that's hard. That's hard work.
No, it is, but it is one of the best payoffs, because that guy is a storyteller like I have never seen before, on what isn't written and what's happening underneath the surface in between the words. Like the world building that he puts together is this massive tapestry that's incredible. But he does start very, very small. So if you guys have ever read like the Mistborn series or the Stormlight series, I got into it really easily, and I have a less critical ear than Stephen does. And I've enjoyed some books where you've said, "Oh, I couldn't get through it because the writing was so poor." That's not talking about Brandon Sanderson. But with this one, I remember my wife, I was like, "Hey, because anytime I'm like, hey, there's this thing that I love, and I want other people that I know to love it." And so I showed it to Josh, I showed it to my wife, I showed it to other people. My wife couldn't make it through it. She was like, I am so bored. And then I realized, yeah, actually the first couple chapters are really just intense exposition, amount of detail about this guy in a cart. And he's just in a cart for a very long time, and and
kind of nothing happens for a while, and he throws you in the middle of this world where he's not bothered to explain any of the terminology. So half of the point of it, like you're just like,
you're piecing it together.
What is even happening? But the thing I do like about it is once you kind of are patient and sit through that, there's this moment where it all kind of clicks, and all the terminology he's been using starts kind of making sense. It's almost like, I don't know, if you ever had to do like a cold read of like Clockwork Orange, where it, like, without realizing there was this giant glossary at the end, and you're trying to kind of get into it and you're trying to understand it, and then you have this moment where you're like, oh, that's what they're meaning,
right?
And then it all kind of clicks. It's a very similar thing, but he's less of he's not a very succinct writer, I'll say that. Like, he's not very short, but then again, he can be when it counts,
right?
So it's funny. I don't know, it's interesting, but yeah, I'll side with Cory on it.
But I'll just tell you this, Stephen, you don't have to listen to me if you don't want to, but I am not exaggerating. One of the best written fight scenes in a battle I have ever read, ever. And it happens in book 3, and each of his books are like a trilogy, and so basically in book 9 of this series that he's writing, I saw in my mind more vividly than I've ever experienced exactly what was going on, and I could feel myself
responding,
speeding up and slowing down the cadence based on like the ebb and flow of the battle, and it was just so good. And I don't even have, like, I was telling Josh, I was like, dude, you're coming up on this part, and I didn't want to spoil anything for you. He knew exactly what I was talking about. It's just so good.
Yeah, and I mean, like, just from a writing perspective, it's really cool because it's that point where all the threads start tying themselves, and you're like, oh, okay, good. Because it's like he starts like tying up all the loose ends, and you're like, okay, this is actually going somewhere. Which is
there's like 12
really
payoffs
fulfilling.
in one chapter where it's like, this has been this massive arc. Anyway.
Well, I'll have to show you a book. One of my favorites is from an author, a friend of mine who actually just passed away last year, the year before. Anyway, it's a story of this like orphaned Native American who grows up to be this like amazing warrior back in the colonial times, and it's like this epic story. But yeah, some of his battle scenes are just like, feel like you're getting tomahawks thrown at your face.
Yeah.
And you're just reading it. It's the
It's
best.
awesome. I love when books do that.
Yeah, it's funny. I should read this because it's just like so good.
Do you need us to vamp for another 20
No,
minutes? while you look
I
up a
found
quote?
it already. No, I was reading this book. This book on editing actually.
That's fine. Keep going.
The iPad of wonder. I was reading this book on editing to prep for this class that I teach on editing writing, and the author, she mentioned this book, and she quoted the first paragraph, and it's like, it was wonderful. And so I went and requested it from the library, and they bought it and shipped it to me. And then my wife stole it from me and read it in like a week, and I have yet to finish it. I'm like a quarter of the way through. But anyway, it's I'm just gonna read it because it's so good. Is this allowed?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. This is Eli Gottlieb. I don't know if he pronounces it Eli or Ellie, but... And the book is The Boy Who Went Away. I first noticed something strange happening to my mother 6 months earlier in the motionless days of January. During a cold snap that turned everything the hue of smoke, her clothes suddenly began to grow bright, vivid, as if powered by a secret store of summer brilliance. Although it was frigid outside, her skirts shrank upward above the knees, while the heels of her shoes grew downward into spikes, curved like the teeth of animals that made a racketing military clatter on the floors of our house. I was sick with the flu for 2 weeks straight, and I noticed that with my father gone to work for the day, she would sometimes go upstairs and spend an hour carefully penciling freshness into her face. And then to my amazement, she'd leave on a long run to the store. She seemed energized at strange times of the day, sparked into excited conversation by a random headline, a snatch of music on the Magnavox, or the blue of 2 jays she'd spotted tussling over seeds in the snow of our backyard. Bouncing as she walked, she would sometimes, for no obvious reason, come up to me and interrupt what I was doing to ask, "Front and center, sweetness, how are you?" It's like, what? And, you realize what's going on in the family quickly. But he's just set up so much in one paragraph. It's just crazy. It's been a while since I read the first paragraph of something and went, oh, okay, I need to get this.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
That's rad.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So now that we're reading quotes, I just thought to tie it back in,
Quote
I'm going to read a quote.
Okay.
And this ties into the idea of what you did with your book, that you're kind of just picking an idea and going with it. So this is from Chip Kidd, who's one of my favorite creatives in the world. He wrote this book called The Cheese Monkeys about a teacher getting fired for teaching. It's great. If you teach college, you should read it. But it's called The Cheese Monkeys. And it's never fall in love with an idea. They're horrors. If the one you're with isn't doing the job, there's always another.
Oh, wow.
And that's
It's really good.
so anyhow, yeah. I think that's actually, that book's really good, and it talks a lot about kind of the act of creativity and some of the kind of the sort of hard truths about like graphic design and commercial art that that we can't teach. But yeah, I always recommend that book, and that just came to mind when you were talking about kind of picking one, because I think that's true. It's like if you get too precious about a specific idea, chances are it might actually be the worst one, Whereas I think just picking an idea and chasing it, because of the fact that inevitably in writing, it's like you're not gonna, like, unless you're lucky and you're like Jack Kerouac on the one book he wrote on a giant sheet of one piece of paper. I don't think that happens for most people.
Yeah.
And I think even him replicating that didn't work quite as well, because some of his later books just weren't that strong. There was some weird magic about that first
came
one.
Together.
But so I tend to think, like, most of the time, like, you're going to be rewriting and redrafting and finding all these holes and stuff in it anyway, which actually was kind of a question I had with writing long form, because like writing for a graphic novel, I write 5 pages. That's like 20 something pages in comics. you know.
Yeah.
But like with a novel, like, or a book, like when you're working on that, how do you avoid the possibility of just editing as you go, and then ending up in an editing loop?
Oh yeah,
Like,
and that happens to people all the time, and that can turn into a form of resistance. It's like, oh, I'm just gonna edit this chapter until I'm 75, and never
wow.
move on.
So how do you balance between the desire to tweak a little bit?
Yeah, that's super idiosyncratic. Like, I feel like I've built a good sense by now of what works and what doesn't, and that comes from a good couple of years in journalism and many years of reading great stuff. Yeah, we actually had a really cool Skype interview in my class today with a friend of mine, a mentor who writes for the New York Times, and they asked that exact question to her. They said, how do you get to the point where you know that it's working and you don't have to like worry that it's not ready, etc. And she basically said, that's a time factor. You just get to a point where you have this sense of, okay, it looks good or it doesn't, and what to tweak. So that's hard to answer just because it's so personal. But definitely people should watch out for that phenomenon of just, well, I have something that I can always edit. It's like, well, good, but you can edit until you're dead, so.
Yeah. And there's an interesting thing with books specifically that I don't think happens with other forms of storytelling as much. And I experienced this again recently, but have you guys ever read From the Cheap Seats, which is Neil Gaiman's book of, it's a big compilation of his like forewords and speeches and letters to the editor.
Yeah, I haven't. You've told me about it.
No, so good. It is fascinatingly good because he just loves reading and loves writing and loves storytelling so much that it just like bleeds from every page. It's like one of the most inspiring books to read when you're in a rut, because it's just like, I want to do something, and it's not like, it's different than the War of Art, which is like, if I don't go do something, then I'm wasting my life. This is like, I want to go do something because I'm just full right now. But he describes this experience of, as a kid, he, both parents worked, or some situation where he got dropped off at the library every day in the summers so that his mom could go to work. And he would just consume books, and he just loved reading, and the librarians loved him because he loved reading and all this stuff. And he said, I have revisited some of those books, and some of them are not like I experienced. They are awful, awful, terrible books. And others, I realized that I had invented out of whole cloth entire scenes and lines that really touched me, that I thought were part of the book, but were just the experience of reading. And it was super interesting because the last episode with Scott, I was describing this experience that I had when I took off on my motorcycle, and I slept in the beaches and the parks and on the side of the road for several weeks and just lived on the street. And I brought with me a compilation of short stories by Joseph Conrad, which is a very like seafaring type thing. And if you're ever going to go and intentionally be homeless for a little while and just kind of wander around, you need to bring either like Moby Dick or Joseph Conrad with you, because it feels very much like you're a lone man in the sea, and it just makes the experience much more richer. But it was really interesting because I described this line that has stuck in my head for a decade and a half. That line is not in the book. I started listening to the book again. It's not in the book. I made it up. It makes sense in the story, but I actually wrote a line in my memory that I have replayed over and over and over again as a point of motivation that's become part of my personality.
Wow. That
wasn't in the experience that I had. I invented it.
What's the line?
Yeah.
The line is they spend, what happens is this guy's first journey out as an officer at sea, and he gets on this boat called the Judea, and on the side on the plaque under the masthead it says, Judea, London, do or die. And that is the theme of the book. And he continues to refer to that, as they're getting battered and beaten. And at one point in time, they are pumping the bilge because there's a slow leak that's happening, and they're tacking upwind. So they're going in a zigzag pattern towards the wind, and they're having to bilge pump 2 of every 4 hours out of a 24-hour period. Every 4 hours, they're pumping for 2 hours. And so they're just exhausted, and he just describes in excruciating detail about like how hard it is to just work until you're mindless, right? Then they go in and they're at this thing, and a series of things happen that kind of waylay this ship into this harbor, and they can't leave for like a month at a time. And in my mind, I invented the line, "I longed for the bilge pump," which is I've used as a reminder to that, like, I prefer work to boredom. I prefer productivity to mindless entertainment. I enjoy video games and TVs and movies and stuff, but if I go too long without working and producing something, I long for the bilge pump. And that's been something, it's not in the book. It's not in there. I made it up. And so a question I have about writing is that intentional, where you intentionally leave space for the reader to insert their own imagination? Because, I mean, somebody like Joseph Conrad is not known for his brevity. I mean, the reason that line isn't in the book is because it took him 600 words to say that. Mm-hmm. And he said it much better, but it wasn't succinct. But in his wandering kind of around the subject, it allowed me as a reader to kind of insert my experience into that and teach myself something from this experience. Is that something that just happens in writing? Or is that something where you're like intentionally like, right here I'm going to be vague because I'd like the reader to paint a picture?
Yeah, I mean, ideally in anything we produce, we're letting the viewer and the reader engage with it in a way that helps them bring something to the table. And if we're hitting people over the head with emotions or different things, we don't give them that opportunity. And I'm sure, Josh, you've seen that in your comic, right? You keep it maybe understated isn't the right word, but you let the facts speak for themselves, and people can kind of bring their own emotions to it. I don't know if that applies to you.
No, and I've had to catch myself because like there are times where like for impact I do want to be a little exposition oriented, because almost to make things like matter of fact in the way that they're being spoken about that shouldn't be spoken about matter of factly. But it's funny because I'm always struck by the thing I'm struck by in writing and in comics is there's just these little poignant things that I experience as a reader. Like one of my favorite books, and I hate that it's one of my favorite books because it's really cocky the way that he titled it, but I don't know if you've read A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius by Dave Eggers.
No.
It's annoyingly true to the title, which is annoying.
He's not being sarcastic.
That's awesome.
Kind of, but I mean, it is kind of that. It's a really weird. Dave Eggers is. I mean, he edits McSweeney's. He's also a graphic designer, but he's a phenomenal writer. He wrote like the screenplay for Where the Wild Things Are, and a couple other movie screenplays and stuff. But he's written a bunch of novels. He's a really good novelist. But it was his first book, and by all means, it shouldn't be good. And it was excellent. And he was like on The Real World. So he should not be good at writing.
Wow, or thinking.
But it's so good. And there's this point in the story where he's talking about an apartment that him and his brother lived in. His little brother, who like his parents had passed away, and so he's having to like get an apartment to kind of take care of his like little brother's like 6 or 7 years old, and how they found this spot in the apartment where there's this perfect stretch of wood floor where you can get the perfect slipping if you're wearing socks.
Oh yeah.
and then he has a diagram, but it's with text, and it's done in the most like postmodern, like irritating way because it's brilliant. It's so good, and I remember that just hitting me because it gives you this visual that is all with like space and text, and it just stuck with me and annoyed me to the point where I'm like, I want to do something like that with writing. It's too good.
Yeah.
Similarly, like I feel that way about Chris Ware when I read Jimmy Corrigan, The Smartest Kid on Earth. There's like a 5-panel sequence, and it would be, for a lot of people, it wouldn't be their favorite part of that book. But if you're a cartoonist or a novelist and you haven't read Chris Ware, you're insane. You should read Chris Ware. But it's a 4-panel sequence where he just shows the main character, who's kind of this pathetic guy, and he's sitting at a restaurant, like alone by himself, like having a cup of coffee, and it's 4 panels of him just wiping his nose and just going sniff. Like it's like the most non-action I've seen in a comic, and he does that over and over again throughout the comic, like these 4-panel, 5-panel sequences where it's just a finger wiping a nose and going sniff, like, but it gives you all you need to know about this character. There's just weird things like that happen in so many stories that kind of like pull that string that makes me feel like I should be writing, because I almost feel anger when I experience that. Because it's almost like envy in a weird way. It's like I want to be doing that, and I don't know if I will be doing that, but like I think that's definitely a sign of being somebody who should probably be making stuff. Is if you see something beautiful and you're hit with this just like pull of like, I need to be like participating in this thing, because like and it's like there's endless things like that just stick with me from specific books. But it is interesting to think that some of the things that stick with me from books are possibly not there, and that gets into the reliability of memory too, which is a whole other interesting thing. We should do that as a topic for sure, because that's a real kind of concern of mine, writing.
Right, because you're writing an autobio.
Yeah,
and everyone's, what I've found with everyone's memory, and this is really difficult, is you polarize your memories. So if you think about people in the past that you have not spoken to for a while, they are either exceptionally good or exceptionally bad.
Sure.
And no one is not no one. Most people that you meet are very nuanced. And this actually reminded me of Stan Lee, who passed away today. And you have 2 reactions. You have one reaction where people are saying, oh, he's the greatest, and he was amazing, and he did this stuff, and it was incredible, and changed my life. And then you have this other reaction of, the guy was like a terrible business person and screwed over his co-creators, and, he was a horrible whatever. And the fact of the matter is that both of those things are true, and to some extent. But in the middle is the reality of the situation, where you have, like the rest of us, a nuanced individual who did some great things, made some mistakes, maybe made some bad choices intentionally, and yet it's interesting to see people's memory of someone polarized so drastically.
It's funny because among my cartoonist friends, who are all aware of like Stan Lee's like shady past as well,
sure,
most of them have been really positive about it, but to the point where there is that part of me that's like, do we want to be that positive about it? Because I mean, Ditko died this year, and you could kind of mention that maybe it should have been in a different order, but it's like, but then it's like, you have to also remember as a cartoonist, and this is like, I was actually saddened today to hear that, because like it or not, like Stan Lee is why Marvel Comics like lasted through the whole it's like the pre-satanic panic of like the 30s with comics, and the 40s. It's like he's the reason Marvel Comics actually lasted. Like the Comics Code like kind of saved comics for a while, and actually he's also the reason they started skirting around the comics code. There's a lot of things that he kind of brought to comics, like it or not, like kept comics alive when they would have potentially died as an art form. So it's like he's important as a figure. And I agree, he's nuanced because there's great things he did. You know, his name was on like every comic I read as a kid and the bullpen and stuff. But then you get older and you read some of that shady stuff. You're right. It's a duality.
But I think any of us risen to a certain level of fame and scrutiny. I know that I've done and said things that I wish I could take back and I'm not proud of. Yeah. And luckily no one knows who I am. And so no one knows those things.
Yeah, but we're not like under the microscope, you know. Yeah, and once again, we're not like in giant positions of power like he was at the time that, you know, some of the negative things happened too. Like a perfect example, like one of my favorite authors passed away a few years ago, like J.D. Salinger, and it's like, you know, he was probably completely insane by the time he died. And there's accounts like there, you know, I got really interested in him, like a lot of young writers and stuff, like in early college, where I read all the books about him that people had tried to track him down and tried to write biographies, and he's kind of a recluse. And there's a couple books about him by ex-girlfriends, and they're very disturbing. Because so it's one of those things of like trying to rectify this author who, like, you know, identified like this whole genre of fiction that didn't really even exist before him that I love. And yet at the same time, like, you know, this negative aspect, it's fascinating. I don't know, but it's interesting. Maybe we all will get there. Maybe the book that, you know, Stephen's working on will put him in the hot seat.
Will launch you into the stratosphere of fame.
Well, and it's so funny because like Ira Glass has a really good way of describing that. I don't know if you've seen his little like 1 minute YouTube thing. But he has a thing that, you know, he talks about how your tastes are up here.
The gap.
Yeah. And, and there's this huge gap between what you can do, but your tastes are up here. And it's like, through all of this, and this applies to everybody, but like my tastes are like way up here. And as I start actually doing things, I get so much more empathy for everybody out there who is working and publishing and realizing, wow, this is actually really difficult to do. Or, wow, that's a huge time commitment. Or, wow, I can't even believe they put that sentence together the way they did. Or, holy cow, they drew that, you know. All of this, the creative process helps me be a little bit less critical of all the work that I see. Because, you know, you realize, like, okay, this isn't just walk in and do it.
Because you're, as Teddy Roosevelt said, you've given up your seat in the arena as a spectator.
Yes.
And now you're fighting.
You're bloody,
muddy. You know. Yeah. You're no longer what was those cold something souls that never risk. I can't remember the line, but such a great quote. Yeah. But it is fascinating because
greatly.
Than those that dare greatly, because to fail is way more difficult to do than to criticize. And I see this, there are several movements going on right now where you have people that are building their reputation off of being hypercritical of something. And when it comes time to deliver, they're not, you know, and it's like, oh, well, that's kind of interesting that, you know, you are finding that, you know, and that's kind of a common thing, I think. The Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Where the less you know about something, the higher you rate your ability to do that thing. And then as soon as you start doing that thing, you begin to realize all of the nuances and all of the difficulties and all of the challenges that you couldn't see from the stands. But now that you're on the field, you're like, oh, I see why this is so hard now. And it's a fascinating thing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, like, I can say most cartoonists I know, especially the ones who got into cartooning being like I've spoken to a few recently that got into it, like, as a screenwriter, I had a script and I just didn't think it was going to get made. So I thought comics would be an easy way to do that. So then I started doing comics. And then it always is followed up with like, and they were like really hard. Like it took forever. It took like, way longer than I thought.
That's
like
awesome.
Yeah.
or like illustrators who would be really critical of cartoonists and be like, well, I'm a really good illustrator, I'll just do a comic, because
Right.
all the comics suck anyway, so I'll just do it because I can illustrate. And then they face those challenges for the first time of like, how do you get a word balloon in a panel that doesn't look crunched, and like how do you make like time flow fluidly, and how do you break out of like the grid with paneling but have it be legible and have people be able to follow along. And
Yeah, how do you
like
how do you
all the
make it so the
weird
reader knows which panel to look at next?
yeah and, like or like those moments where you start realizing, oh, that's why that person does that thing I hate, because it works. Like,
Yeah.
So I've definitely found that too. I think when I was a young cartoonist, I used to especially look at cartoonists now that I really revere and think, well, they're not the real cartoonists. And I look at all the photo real guys,
Yeah.
who are excellent, but not realizing that those photo real guys are all looking at, people like George Harriman and like drooling,
Yeah.
and he's drawing like a little stick figure mouse. But then you look at that stick figure mouse, like the Ignatz drawings, and it's like, oh, that's really hard to do. Like,
Yeah.
that's actually harder to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a really weird thing when you really start doing things, how you start kind of appreciating it. I guess it would be akin to like watching a boxing match and thinking, all you do is just kind of run around and like hit each other.
Just kind of keep your fists up, right? That's it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And you get winded in your first round and you're like, oh crap, you have to like do cardio and like all this other weird stuff.
I once made the mistake of stepping into the boxing ring having eaten an entire Taco Bell meal.
Oh my gosh.
College, man. College.
I like how your college experimentation is Taco Bell boxing.
Violent.
So we've been going for a while. I'd like to wrap this up. Is anybody in the chat?
No, it's pretty dead right now.
So here's my question. You are on, and you can kind of sing us out here on this one, but you're on kind of a bit of a high. After coming out of a low, you've had, probably a series of small successes, and you're kind of rolling with that momentum. What is your plan to overcome that first slump when you get hit with, when the effect of this decision that you've made wears off and it becomes mundane?
Mm-hmm.
What is your plan to continue to be productive on this book and finish?
I have yet to establish a plan. I need to say X word count by X date. That's what I need to say.
Okay.
And I couldn't do that off the top of my head, but that's what it comes down to for me. Because if I'm not the type of person who would crank out 50,000 words and let it be garbage.
Yeah.
I wouldn't take the time to do that, and so I know that if I hit a certain word count by a certain time frame, it will be worth my time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, how do you quantify,
And
I want it to be done. It's like, well...
Does that help you on a micro scale? Like, if you know that you have a large goal, do you just automatically know that you need to work on that today and not put it off until tomorrow?
Right. Unless I want to pretend to have a Rocky moment where I write the screenplay over 2 nights or whatever he did, which is not going to happen. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Josh, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm glad you got over the first hurdle, and I'm hoping you get over all the future hurdles. And I think regardless, you got to have that finish as the goal. So I would not let yourself off the hook until you finished at least the first draft. And if the first draft gets finished and it's not worth, revisiting, then, it's a much, I don't know, to me that would be a much a much better failure than
Yes.
the success of having a really solid chapter.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but I suspect you're going to make something great, and I'm excited. It's cool to see, kind of like night and day. The last time I talked to you, it's cool to see you doing it, because I think you're going to get a lot of fulfillment out of it. Like there will be frustration and all of that,
Oh,
but
heck yeah. Yeah.
you know, I definitely think if you're kind of built for making, you have to make to be
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
content.
Yeah.
You know.
Josh, will you take a minute and describe that? Because your insight, this is going to be weird with Stephen sitting here, but your insight on Stephen is fascinating to me because
Sure.
it's kind of like my parents seeing my baby every couple months, where I see my baby every day. And so like every once in a while I'm like, wow, he's way bigger than he was. But they see him and it's like, holy crap, he's gigantic. He's like doubled in size, right? And so because you interact with him so infrequently compared to me seeing him multiple times a week, sometimes even daily, you just described something that I find fascinating because I haven't noticed a change because for me it's been very gradual.
Oh, funny.
But you had some insight into kind of the first time that you met him, and now you're meeting him again for the second time. Would you describe that change that you're talking about?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a pretty easy thing to describe because I think I mentioned this too, like
I think,
part of why, like one of the first things I mentioned to you, Stephen, was like when I first met you was like, what are you working on and when are you getting it done? I couldn't help but like jump on you about it because I got this weird vibe, and it's like this literally only happens if I'm hanging out with like an illustrator who hasn't drawn in a while,
Yep.
Yeah.
and they like,
or
an artist who feels like they need to be painting. Like, I don't know, like just whenever I meet a creative who like has that bug and they aren't chasing it, there's this thing. It's like a look. I can't explain it, but it's
Funny.
like it emanated. Like you were kind of like at that point of either like, I don't know, quitting or going. And I don't know. There was just like, there was a vibe of that. And I know that's weird to say, but it was
so
just
funny.
pretty weird. And it became pretty clear after like 3 sentences of talking to you. And I was like, okay, I'm totally the type who like, I've been where you were. And so I just wanted to be that jerk who's just like, dude, do it, you know?
I appreciated it. I did.
It's fascinating though, because it's cool to see, because now I don't get that sense at all. Like I'm seeing somebody who's actually got that spark and you're doing it. And so like that to me is exciting, and I hope it continues, because like I really do think if you keep showing up, you're gonna get like results, you know?
Yeah.
So that's sure. But it is very interesting because you actually seem happier, weirdly enough. So
yeah. That's astute.
Well, good. Okay, so if you want to check out Stephen's work, you're going to have to wait for a while. But if you want to check out Josh and I, you don't have to wait at all, because my work can be found at CoryKerr.com. I've got a new poster up that you can buy at CoryKerr.com/store. And special thanks to No Saboteurs, Josh's band, for the intro music there. And you can see their touring schedule and all types of stuff about them at Facebook.com/NoSaboteurs. And if you'd like an insight into, and I don't say this jokingly, but something that might save your life, QuarterlyStories.com, because it is an excellent comic. So go check those out. And is there anywhere that people can interact with you or follow you online? You've got a Instagram or something.
I have an Instagram, but yeah, let's touch base in a bit, and I can throw a link out. Okay. Maybe.
So stay tuned for ways that you can see Stephen's work, and we appreciate everybody in the comments. I'd like to know those people that have started, how you've gotten through that slump that happens after the initial excitement. So in the comments, if you could let us know, how is it that you get past that? Because I think that would be, and not just for Stephen, but I think Stephen represents most people. Josh and I a while ago, and many people that are watching this now and listening to this, And so that kind of advice of how you do that, because even I'm still interested in that, because it seems like I need different techniques to fight different battles all the time. So when you have that initial burst of productivity and you can go for a couple weeks or a couple months, you always seem to run out of gas at some point. What do you guys do at that point? I'd love to know that in the comments. And we will see you guys in a couple days.